Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find. Let's go! This giant sturgeon caught off the coast of Virginia in 1928 weighs 750 pounds and is over 2 meters long, yet it is still not the record. Atlantic sturgeons can reach 800 pounds and live up to 60 years. This photo was taken in Paris in 1915, right in the middle of World War I, and the children are playing with handmade wooden airplanes and a toy cannon, copying exactly what was happening on the real front lines just a few hundred kilometers away. This is Neil Armstrong and David Scott just after their Gemini 8 capsule splashed down in 1966, the same mission where Armstrong performed the first ever manual docking in space, then nearly lost control of the spinning spacecraft. In 1985, the Philadelphia police dropped bombs from a helicopter onto a residential neighborhood to remove a radical commune called MOVE, and the fire was allowed to burn for over an hour, destroying 65 homes and killing 11 people, including 5 children. In May 1940, a German Dornier Do-17 bomber crashed directly into a residential house in Belgium, killing all 4 crew members and 2 civilians who were simply at home. The Dornier Do-17 was nicknamed the Flying Pencil for its incredibly slim fuselage. In 1931, the Berlin police tested a bulletproof vest by having an officer shoot directly at a woman wearing it. And she is smiling because the vest held. Early bulletproof vests of that era were made of layered silk and steel plates, weighed up to 10 kilograms. 2 American soldiers from the 387th Bombardment Group casually leaned on an unexploded German bomb in France in 1944. Their unit flew the B-26 Marauder, which pilots nicknamed the Widowmaker for being nearly impossible to fly. A boy chips away at the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, a wall that divided families for 28 years and was guarded by over 300 watchtowers with orders to shoot anyone who tried to cross. Over 140 people lost their lives attempting to get to the other side. In 1974, Turkish forces landed in Cyprus after a Greek-backed coup attempted to unite the island with Greece, splitting Cyprus into 2 parts that remain divided to this day, making it one of the last frozen conflicts in Europe. In the 1960s, feeding bears from your car window in Yellowstone was completely normal. The park even had designated bear shows where visitors gathered to watch bears eat garbage. It took decades of maulings and hundreds of destroyed cars before the park finally banned the practice in 1970. Rosa Parks being fingerprinted in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956. Her refusal to give up her bus seat triggered a 381-day boycott that cost the city's transit system so much money it was forced to end segregation on public buses. Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in Westminster Abbey in 1953 was the first ever to be broadcast live on television, and so many British families bought their first TV set just to watch it that sales tripled in a single month. The German DRG Class 61 locomotive built in 1935 looked like something from the future and performed like it too, reaching 175 kilometers per hour and making it one of the fastest steam trains ever built. Kabul in 1973, a modern, peaceful city with wide roads and clean rivers that was once called the Paris of Central Asia. Just 6 years later, the Soviet invasion began a chain of wars that never truly ended, turning one of the region's most developed capitals into rubble. This massive Maya stela was found in the jungle ruins of Copan, Honduras in 1885, a city that was completely abandoned around 900 AD for reasons archaeologists still cannot fully explain. Every inch of this stone is covered in hieroglyphs that took modern researchers over a century to decode. This machine gun crew on Biak Island in 1944 was credited with half of 109 enemy soldiers in a single engagement on June 22nd, one of the bloodiest days of the Pacific Campaign. The battle for Biak was so fierce that Japanese forces held underground cave networks for weeks. A Soviet soldier guards a public telephone booth shaped like a giant military cap near Leningrad in 1925. Propaganda was so deeply embedded in early Soviet culture that even a beach phone booth had to carry a red star. This photo was taken seconds before a gunman shot Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981. He was hit 4 times, but survived, and later personally visited his attacker in prison and forgave him. American soldiers celebrate Japan's surrender in Paris on August 15, 1945. A war that lasted 6 years, involved over 30 countries, and took an estimated 70 to 85 million lives, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Betty Burden, a 16-year-old hairdresser, plays with children on a rubble heap in Birmingham in 1951. 6 years after the war ended, entire neighborhoods still looked like this because Britain was so broke it could barely afford to rebuild. Ukrainian women in traditional dress greet German forces in Kyiv in 1941. Many Ukrainians initially saw the Germans as liberators from Soviet rule, which had caused the Holodomor famine just years earlier, killing an estimated 3 to 5 million Ukrainians. Residents of Signal Hill, California, watch a massive oil refinery fire from their cars in 1958. The town sat on one of the richest oil fields in U.S. history, with wells so densely packed that a single fire could take down the entire district. This is the Maliki-Maidan cannon in Bijapur, India. Cast in 1549, it weighs 55 tons and is one of the largest cannons ever made in the medieval world. It was so heavy that it took 400 oxen and 10 elephants just to move it into position on the battlefield. In 1918, the Hog Island shipyard near Philadelphia needed 8,000 workers urgently to build ships for World War I, offering $3.85 for a 10-hour day. It became the largest shipyard ever built at that time, producing 122 ships. The Peel P-5O, built on the Isle of Man from 1962 to 1965, is officially the smallest production car ever made. Just 134 centimeters long, 1 seat, 1 door, and no reverse gear. So to go backwards, you simply lifted it by a handle at the rear and turned it around by hand. Saddam Hussein and Fidel Castro in the 1970s, 2 leaders who together survived a combined total of over 650 known assassination attempts, most of them organized by the CIA. Both died of natural causes, which their enemies never managed to prevent. Afghan fighters watch a Soviet convoy in Nuristan in 1979, armed and funded by the CIA with over $3 billion. These same fighters later became the foundation of the Taliban. The Soviet Union lost over 15,000 soldiers in Afghanistan before withdrawing in 1989. German submarine U-805 being escorted by 2 American tugboats after surrendering on May 14, 1945. Exactly 81 years ago today. The U.S. Navy paraded it along the East Coast for the public to see before sinking it in the open ocean in February 1946. A Japanese Zero kamikaze pilot approaches the USS White Plains through thick fog in 1944. The carrier's captain threw the ship into a hard turn at the last second, causing the pilot to clip only the rear and crash into the water. A few degrees of difference and hundreds of sailors would have been lost. During World War II, Boeing's factory in Seattle was covered with a fake neighborhood built on the roof, complete with fake streets, houses, trees, and even parked cars, to fool Japanese bombers flying overhead. British soldiers cleaned their weapons in the ruins of a church in Cassino, Italy, on May 13, 1944. One of the bloodiest battles of the Italian campaign, where Allied forces fought for 4 months to break through a single German defensive line. Dozens of destroyed Soviet and German tanks left in the streets of Berlin after the final battle in 1945. The Battle of Berlin lasted just 16 days, but cost over 80,000 Soviet lives alone, making it one of the deadliest urban battles in human history. The B-24 Liberator Little Warrior explodes over Germany on June 29, 1944, after a direct hit to its fuel tanks. The crew had no chance of survival. B-24 crews in World War II had a statistical chance of not surviving their required 25-mission tour of duty. Full cold weather kit issued to U.S. soldiers in May 1942, including snowshoes, skis, and a portable stove. Just months after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Army was already preparing for winter warfare in the Arctic. A Soviet helicopter pilot poses in the 1970s next to the wreck of a German bomber that crashed in the Murmansk region during World War II. 30 years later, it was still lying exactly where it fell. A scarecrow dressed as a surrendering German soldier with a white flag, photographed in a field just weeks after World War I ended in 1918. A dark piece of humor from farmers who had watched 4 years of industrial-scale destruction unfold around them. Victory Day celebrations in Omsk, USSR, in 1980. Just 35 years after the war ended, millions of Soviet veterans were still alive to march in a country that had lost an estimated 27 million people in World War II, more than any other nation on Earth. U.S. Navy PBY Catalina seaplanes based on Espiritu Santo Island in the South Pacific in 1942. This flying boat could stay airborne for 24 hours straight and had a range of over 4,000 kilometers, making it the primary search and rescue aircraft of the entire Pacific War. Workers assembling the Hindenburg at 60 meters above the ground. At 245 meters long, it remains the largest flying machine ever built by humans. It crossed the Atlantic in just 60 hours, twice as fast as any ocean liner. Workers standing directly on top of the Chernobyl reactor core before the 1986 disaster. What looks like a routine maintenance photo was taken inside the most dangerous machine on Earth. Chernobyl liquidators celebrate completing the concrete sarcophagus over the destroyed reactor in 1986, holding a banner that reads, "We will fulfill the government's order." Many of the men smiling in this photo received lethal radiation doses during construction and did not survive the following years. Henry Cooper knocks Muhammad Ali to the canvas in 1963. Ali himself said it was the hardest knockdown of his entire career, harder even than Frazier's famous left hook. Ali was saved only by the bell and a mysteriously split glove that gave his corner extra time to recover him before the next round. Igor Sikorsky pictured as a young pilot around 1910. By 1912, he had already built the world's first 4-engine aircraft, and decades later invented the modern helicopter design still used today. He started with nothing in Russia, fled the revolution in 1919. On April 5, 1968, Royal Air Force pilot Alan Pollock flew his Hawker Hunter jet through Tower Bridge in London in protest after the RAF ignored the 50th anniversary of his squadron. Loading a torpedo onto the Russian battleship Slava in 1913, just 1 year before this same ship would enter World War I, and she went on to fight in the Baltic for years before being sunk by German dreadnoughts in 1917 during the Moon Sound battle. The royal apiary at Izmailovo Estate in Moscow in 1896, where each beehive was hand-carved as a miniature architectural masterpiece. This estate once belonged to the Romanov Tsars, and beekeeping here dates back to the 17th century. Tsar Alexis kept over 5,000 hives on these grounds. A Soviet prison workshop in Minsk in 1957, where a public shame board lists prisoners who failed their daily work quotas by 27% and 80%, with the words, "Shame on the lazy," written below. Those who met their targets were rewarded with better food, housing, and multi-day visits from their wives. The Gakkel-9 aircraft at a military airfield in St. Petersburg in 1912, designed by Russian engineer Yakov Gakkel, who built some of the most advanced planes of his era entirely without state funding. An anti-aircraft battery positioned in front of the Moscow Planetarium during World War II. The silver dome was so visible from the air that Soviet commanders decided not to camouflage it, and German command reportedly ordered pilots not to bomb it either, using it as a navigation landmark. A Luftwaffe crew member points to their kill markings on a Ju-88 bomber tail in 1941, each silhouette representing a British ship sunk in the Mediterranean. The Ju-88 was so versatile it served as a bomber, torpedo plane, night fighter. Soviet border guards on horseback crossing a mountain river in 1966, while the rest of the world was racing into the jet age, the USSR still relied heavily on mounted patrols to guard its 60,000 kilometers of border, the longest national border in human history. German soldiers surrendered to Soviet troops in East Prussia in 1945. By this point, Germany was losing thousands of men taken prisoner every single day. Of the roughly 3 million German soldiers captured by the USSR, only about 2 million ever made it home alive. A man walks to work past burning American military vehicles in Iraq in 2003, one of the most striking images of how quickly the U.S. invasion turned from a rapid military victory into an endless urban conflict. A French soldier wearing a steel face shield in World War I. This visor was designed after commanders noticed that head wounds from shrapnel were causing catastrophic losses. It weighed nearly 3 kilograms, made it nearly impossible to aim properly. A French sailor shows American soldiers the Eiffel Tower after the liberation of Paris in 1944. When German forces occupied the city, French workers secretly cut the elevator cables so that Hitler would have to climb 1,665 steps if he wanted to reach the top. He never bothered and never stood on it. Professional rat catchers and their terrier dogs in London in 1953. At the time, the city had an estimated rat population equal to its human population of 8 million. Jack Russell and Fox Terriers were specifically bred for this job, capable of catching and killing dozens of rats in a single session. New Zealand soldiers inspect a captured German A-7V tank nicknamed Schnuck on the Western Front in 1918. Germany built only 20 of these massive machines during the entire war, making them incredibly rare on the battlefield. The gun turrets of the B-36 Peacemaker sat so high off the ground that ground crews needed a special escalator to load ammunition. This bomber was so enormous it could carry a nuclear weapon to any point on Earth and return without refueling. A blacksmith workshop at the entrance to Moscow in 1890, where travelers could repair wagons, replace wheels and shoe horses before entering the city. At this time, Moscow had over 30,000 horses working daily in its streets, more than most cities had people. Captured Chinese bandits photographed by Russian imperial forces on the far eastern frontier in 1882, tied together by their braided queues, a humiliation tactic used across the region at the time. A scientist tests a stream near Kiev for radiation on May 9, 1986. Just 13 days after the Chernobyl explosion, while Soviet officials were still publicly insisting the situation was under control. The rivers and groundwater around the plant remained dangerously contaminated for years. A Soviet family unpacks a Red Cross humanitarian aid box in 1992, the year the USSR had just collapsed and food shortages were so severe that millions of families across the former Soviet states depended on foreign aid parcels to survive the winter. A German pilot puts on an electrically heated face mask in World War I. At altitudes above 4,000 meters, temperatures dropped to -40 degrees, and without heating, pilots could lose consciousness from frostbite within minutes. Serra Pelada gold mine in Brazil in 1986. Photographed by Sebastião Salgado. Over 50,000 miners worked here by hand like an ant colony, carrying heavy sacks of ore up wooden ladders from a pit that grew deeper every day. Soviet engineers disassemble a captured American B-29 bomber in Moscow in 1945 to copy it bolt by bolt. Stalin ordered an exact clone produced within 2 years, and Tupolev delivered the Tu-4 on schedule. A field in Normandy covered in abandoned German helmets in 1944, left by soldiers taken prisoner after the Allied breakout. In the weeks following D-Day, entire German units surrendered en masse. Over 200,000 German soldiers were captured in Normandy alone during that summer. A North Korean spy submarine caught in a South Korean fishing net in 1998. Inside were found the bodies of agents who had apparently been on a sabotage mission. North Korea operates one of the largest submarine fleets in the world, with over 70 vessels. An American sergeant lights a cigarette for Soviet locomotive engineers in the 1940s, and the locomotive behind them was built by German arms manufacturer Krupp in 1938, now hauling Allied Lend-Lease supplies to the USSR. A German medical ambulance riddled with bullet holes in Ternopil, Ukraine in the summer of 1941, despite clearly marked Red Cross symbols on both doors. Targeting medical vehicles was a war crime under the Geneva Convention, but on the Eastern Front both sides routinely ignored it from the very first days of the invasion. Soviet troops assault German positions near Kerch in Crimea in 1944. This city changed hands 4 times during the war, making it one of the most fought-over places in the entire Eastern Front. The Kerch Peninsula saw some of the most brutal combat of the war. Crowds stop on a road to watch the Concorde during flight tests at Fairford Air Base in England on April 10, 1969. At the time, it was the most advanced passenger aircraft ever built, capable of crossing the Atlantic in just 3 hours. Today, no passenger jet flies faster than it did 50 years ago. An Italian soldier in a gas mask triggers a gas alarm siren on the front line in 1918. Soldiers had as little as 15 seconds to put on their masks after a gas attack was detected before exposure became fatal. By the end of World War I, chemical weapons had injured over 1 million men. In 1981, a massive sewer explosion tore apart several city blocks in Louisville, Kentucky, destroying 13 miles of underground pipelines in minutes. The cause was hexane gas from a nearby cooking oil plant that had been leaking into the sewer system for days. A 600-kiloton nuclear detonation photographed through the periscope of the USS Carbonero submarine on May 6, 1962. This was 40 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Yet it was just a mid-range test during an era when the U.S. conducted over 200 atmospheric nuclear tests in the Pacific. Japanese generals Shinpei Fukui and Sadashi Kataoka read American Yank military magazines while awaiting internment after Japan's surrender in the Philippines in 1945. Just days earlier, these same men commanded forces that had fought Americans to the last man. Coal miner housing in Panther, West Virginia, in 1946. These were company-owned towns where miners paid rent to the same company they worked for, shopped at company stores, and could be evicted the moment they went on strike. A German soldier prepares to lay anti-tank mines in Ukraine in the summer of 1942. At this point, Germany was still advancing deep into Soviet territory, pushing towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus oil fields. Soviet armorer Elizaveta Ushakova, born in 1923, loads a 100-kilogram bomb onto an IL-2 ground attack aircraft during World War II. She was just 18 when the war began, one of over 800,000 women who served in the Soviet military, many in frontline combat. A Japanese artist sketches the ruins of Hiroshima in September 1945, just weeks after the atomic bomb erased the city in a single second. He was almost certainly still being exposed to residual radiation while drawing, the long-term effects of which were not yet understood by anyone in the world. Soviet partisans emerged from the Odessa catacombs in April 1944. They had been hiding in over 2,500 kilometers of underground tunnels for months, supplied by locals who risked their lives passing food through secret entrances. 9 military tractors dragged the 91-meter, 2,000-ton Soviet submarine B-307 across open terrain in 2005 to deliver it to the Avtovazy Technical Museum in Russia. The submarine was so massive, it took a specially organized military operation just to move it a few kilometers overland. The aftermath of the 1900 Galveston hurricane, still the deadliest natural disaster in American history, killing an estimated 8,000 people in a single night. The city had no seawall and ignored repeated warnings from a meteorologist who predicted the storm days in advance. U.S. soldiers testing the very first GPS receivers around 1978. Each unit weighed several kilograms, required a backpack to carry, and took up to 90 minutes to calculate a single position fix. Today, the same technology fits in every smartphone and updates your location instantly. An ivory tusk weighing over 90 kilograms carried by slaves in Zanzibar in the 1800s. At its peak, Zanzibar was the largest slave trading port in East Africa, exporting both ivory and people to markets across the world. Divers preparing to work under the frozen Yenisei River during bridge construction in Siberia in 1896, in diving suits of that era with no communication, no modern safety equipment, working under ice in near-zero water. The Yenisei Bridge they built still stands today. A Soviet SB bomber shot down over a Berezina River crossing in 1941. In the first weeks of the German invasion, the Soviet Air Force lost over 4,000 aircraft, many destroyed on the ground before pilots even reached them. A line of Italian barrage balloons in 1918, tethered at low altitude with steel cables hanging beneath them, they were designed to force enemy aircraft to fly higher, where they were easier to hit with anti-aircraft guns. Japanese schoolgirls training with bamboo spears in 1940 to prepare for a U.S. invasion. By the final stage of the war, Japan had officially mobilized 28 million civilians, including women and children, to resist an Allied landing with whatever weapons were available. Moscow factory workers producing Molotov cocktails in 1941 during the German advance on the city. At the peak of production, Soviet factories were filling over 100,000 bottles per day. The weapon was named after Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov as a dark joke by Finnish soldiers. A Most Beautiful Legs contest in Paris in 1936, where participants are hidden under curtains so judges evaluate only their legs. This kind of entertainment was wildly popular across Europe in the 1930s. Werner von Braun surrenders to American forces in 1945 along with his rocket team. The same scientists who built the V-2 missiles that bombed London were then quietly transferred to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip and went on to build the Saturn V rocket that sent Americans to the moon. British and French soldiers wade into the sea at Dunkirk in 1940, waiting to be rescued. Over 338,000 troops were evacuated in 9 days by a fleet of 800 civilian boats, fishing vessels, and ferries whose owners crossed the English Channel voluntarily to save them. A Soviet saboteur executed by Finnish forces in Salo, Finland on July 17, 1941. Finland entered World War II alongside Germany specifically to reclaim territory lost in the Winter War just months earlier. Soviet sappers are clearing mines from the grave of Alexander Pushkin at the Sviatogorsky Monastery in 1944 because retreating German forces planted explosives directly at the tomb of Russia's greatest poet. The dog next to the soldiers was trained to detect hidden charges. This American soldier was held in a German prisoner of war camp for years, and the moment of his release in 1945 was captured by a Life magazine photographer. His expression carries something most photos cannot show: the look of a person returning from a place they never expected to leave. In November 1979, Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. A secret military rescue operation failed when 2 aircraft collided in the desert, and the hostages were freed only on the day Reagan became president. German generals captured after the fall of Berlin in 1945, men who once commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers, now standing as prisoners. Of the roughly 90 generals taken by Soviet forces, many never returned home. Pilgrim State Hospital in New York, 1938. Patients are wrapped in wet sheets as a standard psychiatric treatment called continuous bath therapy, believed to calm severe mental conditions. At its peak, this facility held over 13,000 people. Soviet partisans ambushing a railway line in the 1940s, a tactic so effective that Nazi command called the Rail War one of the biggest threats behind the front. During the war, Soviet partisans destroyed over 18,000 trains and derailed thousands of supply convoys. Cuba, 1896. A man sits on a pile of human remains left after years of the brutal colonial war between Spain and Cuban rebels. Spanish forces used a policy called reconcentration, forcing civilians into camps where hundreds of thousands perished from disease and hunger. On February 14, 1945, American bombers accidentally struck Prague instead of Dresden, killing over 700 civilians in a city that was never a military target. The crews had navigational errors due to cloud cover. During the Great Purge, the Soviet NKVD ran a secret operation targeting Poles, executing 111,091 people in just 15 months between 1937 and 1938. That is 10 people shot every single hour, most of them ordinary workers and farmers accused of imaginary crimes they never committed. American women dressed as bushes to test military camouflage suits in a New York suburb during World War I. The U.S. Army actively involved civilians in equipment testing because there were not enough soldiers available on home soil. Until 1996, Ireland operated so-called Magdalen laundries, where unmarried mothers were locked in and forced to work without pay under church supervision. Over 10,000 women passed through these institutions across 150 years, and thousands of their children were taken away. A hunter carrying a black bear through an American forest in 1900, when wildlife had no legal protection and bears were hunted freely across the entire country. It was only after President Theodore Roosevelt refused to shoot a tied bear during a hunt in 1902 that public attitude shifted. Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. The USS California sinking and USS Oklahoma capsized after a Japanese surprise attack that lasted just 110 minutes. The entire assault pushed the United States into World War II the very next day, changing the course of history forever. Sergeant Martini earned the Silver Star on the very first day of Iwo Jima, one of the bloodiest battles in U.S. Marine Corps history. And here he sits calmly on captured Japanese mortar crates to take his next shot. An American soldier with a Vietnamese woman during the Vietnam War, a common sight in Saigon where thousands of U.S. troops spent time off duty in the city's bars and clubs. While some relationships were genuine, the war left behind over 50,000 children of American fathers, most of whom were abandoned after U.S. forces withdrew in 1975. The German Nebelwerfer 41 started as a smokescreen weapon, but became a rocket launcher firing 6 rounds in under 10 seconds. Allied soldiers nicknamed it Screaming Mimi for the terrifying howl it made in flight. Born in 1825, Ezilphia Flynn lived 101 years and helped her husband run a secret underground railroad route guiding enslaved people to freedom through Tennessee and Kentucky. Berlin, 1945. A woman stands with her belongings in front of a city so completely destroyed that over 75 million cubic meters of rubble had to be cleared by hand, a job that took years. Most of that work was done by women, who became known as Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women of Germany. In 1968, the United States saw a record number of bank robberies in broad daylight, with criminals bold enough to act even in the presence of police officers, as captured by this hidden security camera. That era had no fast alarm systems or die packs. Prisoners at Flossenburg concentration camp in Bavaria, 1942, waiting for food after forced labor in the granite quarry that supplied stone for Albert Speer's grand plans to rebuild Berlin. Over 30,000 people perished in this camp, and the quarry still exists today as a memorial site. Jabalia Refugee Camp, northern Gaza, 1987. A Palestinian woman confronts Israeli soldiers at the moment the First Intifada was just beginning, sparked by a traffic accident in this very camp that left 4 Palestinians dead. Jabalia was home to over 60,000 refugees. Thai Queen Sunanda drowned in 1880 at age 19 when her royal boat capsized, while dozens of witnesses stood and watched without helping. Touching a member of the royal family was punishable by death, so every single person on shore chose to obey the law rather than save her life. Actor Tom Mix, or his stuntman, leaping on horseback across Beals Cut, a narrow canyon carved through a California mountain in 1863 during filming of 3 Jumps Ahead in 1923. The gap was over 30 meters deep, and there were no safety nets. A Red Army soldier attaching a Mosin rifle to the barrel of a ZIS-3 cannon, a field trick used to train new gunners by aligning the rifle sight with the artillery barrel to practice aiming without wasting expensive shells. During the Spanish Civil War, Republican forces built torture chambers inspired by surrealist and abstract art with tilted beds, floors covered in uneven bricks, and walls decorated with works in the style of Dali and Kandinsky. French doctor Alain Bombard crossed the Atlantic Ocean alone in a small rubber boat in 1952, surviving 65 days on raw fish and seawater to prove that shipwreck survivors could stay alive without supplies. He lost 25 kilograms. A Belarusian Kolyadin, a ritual massacre from the ancient Slavic winter celebration of Kolyada, photographed in the 1930s before Soviet authorities banned these traditions as anti-communist superstition. These wooden masks are over 1,000 years old in design. New York, 1909. Young girls marching against child labor with slogans in both English and Yiddish, reflecting the massive wave of Jewish immigrants working in sweatshops. At that time, over 2 million American children under age 15 worked in factories and mines, often 12 hours a day with no days off. 4 photojournalists waiting to board a helicopter heading into Laos in 1971, during the secret U.S. military operation that was officially denied by Washington. The helicopter never reached its destination. A Soviet sapper clearing mines on Terazija Square in Belgrade in 1944, using the VIM-203 metal detector developed specifically for urban warfare. After the liberation of Belgrade, engineers cleared over 6,000 mines and unexploded devices from the city streets before civilians could return safely. Berlin, 1919. Fighters using massive bundles of newspapers as barricades during the Spartacist uprising, one of the most symbolic images of the era. The bales of printed press literally became a shield for the people. Nazi racial anthropologist Eva Justin measuring a Romani German woman's skull in 1933 as part of the regime's program to classify people by race. Justin later used her research on Romani children to send them to concentration camps. A woman smuggling bottles of alcohol under her dress during Prohibition in the 1920s, when creative methods of hiding liquor became a whole underground art form. The ban on alcohol lasted 13 years in the United States, but instead of stopping drinking, it created the largest criminal bootlegging industry in American history. Australia's most wanted fugitive Malcolm Naden hid inside a zoo for over a year, sleeping near rhinos and stealing bananas from elephants, evading police for 7 years total from 2005 to 2012. He was finally caught after zoo staff noticed missing food. Post-war Germany. A disabled veteran stands on the street with a sign reading, "No eyes, no hands." One of hundreds of thousands of wounded soldiers left without state support after Germany's collapse in 1945. John Brown was hanged in Virginia in 1859 for leading an armed raid on a federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, attempting to start a large-scale uprising against slavery. He became the first person executed for treason in U.S. history, and just 2 years later, the Civil War began over the exact same issue he died for. A German radio operator and rear gunner inside a Messerschmitt Me-110. In 1941, sitting in one of the most exposed positions in aviation with nothing but a thin canopy between him and enemy fire. A 17-year-old Pam Grier as Miss Colorado Universe runner-up in 1967, just a few years before she became one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses of the 1970s. She later starred in films like Foxy Brown and Jackie Brown. These are life masks of Michael Jackson cast directly from his face for the Thriller video in 1983 and the Ghosts short film in 1996, used by makeup artists to build prosthetics that transformed him into a monster. Canadian Private H.J. Bruce carrying a Bren light machine gun through a forest north of Arnhem in April 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. The Bren was so reliable that Canadian and British soldiers trusted it more than almost any other weapon of the war. Russian white émigré volunteers attending a field Orthodox service in 1938, having fled the Bolshevik Revolution and then traveled to Spain to fight alongside Franco's forces against Soviet-backed Republicans. Rosemarie Nitrobit was a 24-year-old Frankfurt socialite whose client list included some of West Germany's most powerful industrialists, and her unsolved murder in 1957 became the biggest scandal of the post-war era. The case was never officially solved. Mehmet Ali Agca raising his gun in St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981, just seconds before shooting Pope John Paul II 4 times at close range. The Pope survived and 2 years later personally visited his attacker in prison to forgive him, calling him "my brother." Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived both atomic bombings in 1945, first in Hiroshima, then 3 days later in Nagasaki, and was officially recognized as the only person in history to live through both. He spent his final years speaking at the United Nations against nuclear weapons and died in 2010 at age 93. Irina Sendler smuggled 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, hiding them in toolboxes, ambulances, and under tram seats, then buried their real names in jars so families could reunite after the war. She was arrested, sentenced to death, and tortured. Italian soldiers captured by U.S. forces in Tunisia in May 1943, many without boots and in torn uniforms, showing how badly supplied Mussolini's army had become by that point. Within 2 months of this photo, Italy surrendered. An Italian tankette in occupied Corsica around 1942, one of the smallest and most outdated armored vehicles used by any major power in World War II. It was so lightly armored that Allied soldiers reported stopping them with heavy machine gun fire alone. Italian East African auxiliaries captured by British Sudanese forces in 1940, recruited from Eritrea, Somalia, and Ethiopia to fight for an empire that had colonized their own lands. Many of these men had no real loyalty to Italy and surrendered at the first opportunity. American and Japanese soldiers praying together on Aka Island on June 27, 1945, during a rare informal truce that ended the fighting without the destruction seen across the rest of Okinawa. Royal Afghan Army soldiers at a military parade in Kabul in 1962, wearing German-style helmets that Afghanistan purchased from Europe after World War II. Just 17 years after this photo, the Soviet invasion would begin dismantling the entire structure of this army forever. Ghostface, also known as Ringhawk, an Oglala Lakota man, photographed in 1901, just 10 years after the Wounded Knee Massacre that effectively ended armed Native American resistance on the Great Plains. The Hunter brothers stayed airborne for 23 days straight in 1930, with one brother climbing out onto the wing mid-flight to service the engine while the other kept flying. They refueled in the air using a hose from another plane, setting an endurance record that stood for years. Armenian and Kurdish fighters photographed during the Van Uprising of 1915, one of the few places where Armenians organized armed resistance against Ottoman forces. The city of Van held out for weeks until Russian troops arrived, but for most Armenians across the empire, there was no rescue. A black Brazilian soldier guarding German prisoners in Italy in 1945, one of over 25,000 troops sent by Brazil as the only Latin American nation to deploy a full combat force to Europe in World War II. Finnish Colonel Alpo Marttinen fled Finland after World War II for secretly stockpiling weapons in violation of the armistice with the Soviet Union, then joined the U.S. Army at age 39 and rose to colonel a second time. Joseph Kramer was a sideshow performer in the late 1800s who exhibited a rare condition called cutis laxa, or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which causes the skin to stretch far beyond normal limits. Yugoslav women partisans in 1944, part of a resistance movement that tied down over 30 German and Italian divisions and was the most effective anti-Nazi guerrilla force in all of occupied Europe. Around 100,000 women fought in Tito's partisan army, and over 25,000 of them were killed in combat. John McCain photographed in a Hanoi hospital after being shot down over Vietnam in 1967, with both arms broken and a knee shattered from his ejection. He was offered early release because his father was a top U.S. admiral. On July 28, 1917, around 10,000 Black Americans marched in complete silence down Fifth Avenue in New York to protest racial violence, carrying signs reading, "Memphis and Waco, Centers of American Culture." Humphrey Bogart, at 18 years old, serving in the U.S. Navy in 1918, years before he became one of Hollywood's greatest actors. During his service, he received a scar on his lip from a shrapnel wound or a prisoner escort incident. A Japanese prisoner captured by Australian forces in New Guinea in April 1945, just 4 months before Japan's final surrender. By this point, Japanese soldiers in New Guinea had been cut off and forgotten for years. Suharto, at age 45, in his official portrait as Indonesia's new ruler in 1967, just 2 years after seizing power following one of the deadliest purges of the 20th century. Between 1965 and 1966, his forces killed an estimated 500,000 to 1 million people accused of being communists. Turkish soldiers in Korea in the early 1950s, part of a brigade that earned a reputation as some of the toughest fighters in the entire UN coalition. At the Battle of Kunuri in 1950, the Turkish brigade held their ground to cover the retreat of American forces. Wanda Klaff, a guard at Stutthof concentration camp, moments before her execution by hanging on July 4, 1946, convicted of extreme cruelty toward prisoners. She was one of the few female camp personnel to face the death penalty. Soviet soldiers based at Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam in 1987, staging a mock Vietnam War photo, complete with camouflage and American-style poses. The USSR maintained a massive naval base at Cam Ranh until 2002. A German soldier at Stalingrad in 1943, his eyes carrying the look of a man who has already seen too much to be afraid of anything. Of the 300,000 German troops encircled at Stalingrad, fewer than 6,000 ever returned home alive. Abe Isu, at 14 in 1879, who later became a pacifist politician and the man who introduced baseball to Japan, making him one of history's most unlikely combinations of sports pioneer and anti-war activist. Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain in 1940, and on the very next day delivered one of the most powerful speeches in history, warning the nation of years of pain and struggle ahead. Each tag on these children's coats was their only identity document during the 1938 London evacuation. Many of them had no idea where they were going or when they would see their families again. Tobolsk prison in Siberia, founded back in 1855, was one of the most remote and feared places of confinement in the entire Soviet system. The striped uniform on the prisoner instantly told everyone around his status. In the USSR, this outfit meant a strict regime with almost no rights. Mexico actually sent its own fighter squadron to fight in the Pacific in 1945, one of the least known facts of World War II. The Spanish inscription on this 1,000-pound bomb reads, "To Tokyo for Emperor Hirohito, with love, tequila." In the 1930s, the Soviet Union turned mass sport parades into a political tool. Thousands of athletes marching through city streets were meant to show the world that socialism builds perfect powerful people. The giant portrait of Lenin watching over them made clear who this performance was really for. Christopher Kraft personally invented the role of flight director from scratch. Before him, no such position existed anywhere in the world. He was the man in control during every single major first of American human spaceflight, from the first crewed launch to the first spacewalk. In 1942, the Hungarian army was using American Ford trucks while fighting alongside Germany. And even those trucks were useless in the mud without horses to pull them. When the Benjamin Franklin Bridge opened in 1926, it was the longest suspension bridge in the entire world, stretching over 2.9 kilometers across the Delaware River. This photo was taken just days before the grand opening, while workers were still laying the final asphalt by hand. Mexican fighter pilots of the 201st Squadron pose with Conchita Carmelo in Manila on May 1, 1945. These men had just flown halfway across the world to fight in a war that had nothing to do with Mexico's own borders. The squadron flew over 96 combat missions in the Philippines before Japan surrendered. Filipino guards protecting Malacañang Palace in 1944 were officially serving the Japanese-backed puppet government, but many of them were secretly waiting for American forces to return and liberate the country. They had weapons, but were quietly monitored and restricted in ammunition by Japanese officers who never fully trusted them. In 1955, the entire Kensington neighborhood came out to celebrate the groundbreaking of a new public library, a building that took 59 years and 4 different locations to finally get its permanent home. Today, that same Kensington neighborhood is known as one of the most troubled areas in America. 2 American soldiers inspect an unexploded bomb on a road near a captured German airfield in Châteaudun, France, on August 18, 1944, just 10 days after the Allies broke through enemy lines during one of the fastest advances in the entire war. I will be very grateful for your subscription to the channel. Every day I try to tell you about such interesting historical photos.